And so towards the end of October, beginning of November, I do expect the price to start to increase. It also will coincide with more rate cuts, and also it will coincide with the election. The reason why it's volatile is because 65% of people haven't moved their asset in the last 12 months. 65% of Bitcoin is not available. It's being held by long-term holders. They're not willing to sell it in the market. And so even though there's more than 19 million Bitcoin in circulation, there's really only 35% of Bitcoin that is available for trading. So the one-year number is impressive because during that time period, what we saw is Bitcoin's price has gone up substantially. But over the 2-year time frame, Bitcoin's price has tripled.
Picture this: Bitcoin surging past $100,000, maybe even $150,000, and you're watching from the sidelines, wishing you had taken action sooner. According to Anthony Pompliano, that's the exact scenario we could be heading toward. And it's happening faster than you think. With 65% of Bitcoin locked up by long-term holders and a looming supply crunch, Pompliano argues that the next bull run is just around the corner. This is the moment when fortunes are made or lost. So, are you ready to make your move?
I'll give the critics even a better argument, which is it's actually down over the last 3 years, right? It hit an all-time high of 69,000 back in 2021. Now it's trading in the low 60s. And so I think that Bitcoin really is a volatile asset. That's a key piece to this. It's obviously sensitive when it comes to monetary policy, fiscal policy. And so we saw a tightening. Bitcoin dropped from 69,000 down to I think 17,000 as a significant drop in price. Most people in most asset classes would sell the asset, say I'm done with this thing and move on. That's not what happened with Bitcoiners. So if you look today, Bitcoin has fully recovered back. It hit a new all-time high in the low 70,000s, and it's kind of gone sideways, as you mentioned, since March or so. Now, one of the things that people usually don't remember about Bitcoin is in these 4-year cycles, in the halving year, there are two things that tend to be true. Doesn't mean it's always going to be true in the future, but so far, historically has happened. The halving occurs, there's kind of a run-up into that event occurring. What we saw earlier this year was not only did we get the run-up because of the halving, but we also had the ETF approvals. And so there was a repricing of Bitcoin by about a 50% increase going into that halving. So ETFs get approved in January, price goes up, halving occurs, and then there's kind of this like disillusionment for the next, month or so, where everyone was so excited about the halving, they realized it doesn't really do anything. And so there's kind of a sell-off. Now, the sell-off wasn't really that bad, but throughout the summer, we have what I call the sideways summer. And usually in halving years, if you go back to 2020, that's exactly what happened. Kind of Bitcoin, recovered from the quick drop in March with the halving in May, and we pretty much went sideways all summer long. And so if you go back and you look, Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy were buying Bitcoin at around the same price as when the halving actually occurred. Call it, $8,500 to $10,000, somewhere in that range. And so if we look at what happened in 2020, we then got into the end of Q3, beginning of Q4. And really it wasn't until the end of October, November, December, we then went from, call it, $8,000 to $10,000 up to around $30,000 to end the year. And that continued into Q1 of 2021, where we went from 30,000 all the way up to 64,000 in March. And so we had a 600% price increase from the end of Q3 until March of 2021. And so towards the end of October, beginning of November, I do expect the price to start to increase. It also will coincide with more rate cuts, and also it will coincide with the election. And so there's kind of a couple of different factors that are coming together that I think will push Bitcoin's price higher. Now, how long will that last? Are we going to go from November to March again? Maybe. Is it going to be a 600% increase? That seems unlikely to me. And so maybe it's something like, hey, it is going to be kind of a 6-month, kind of upwards movement in price, but over that 6 months, maybe we double in price, or we have a 50% increase in price, or maybe it's 150%. I don't know what the exact severity is going to be, but I do feel like a lot of Bitcoin's price movement is much more tied to timing of the year, of the halving schedule, etc., than it is to, oh my God, it went sideways. We need a net new buyer to come in. It's just, we continue to see this pattern over and over again. And there's probably something about the halving takes about 6 months or so to kind of work itself out so that people start to feel that change in incoming supply. And so if you have the same demand, the supply drops by 50%, it works itself out, then bam, here you go. You've got something that seems to be more scarce in terms of that incoming daily supply. And that ultimately leads to the price repricing of the asset, kind of at the end of that year and into the beginning of the next year. The reason why it's volatile is because 65% of people haven't moved their asset in the last 12 months. 65% of Bitcoin is not available. It's being held by long-term holders. They're not willing to sell it in the market. And so even though there's more than 19 million Bitcoin in circulation, there's really only 35% of Bitcoin that is available for trading. And so as you get this increase in demand or decrease in demand, it is exasperated or kind of exaggerated because you have such a small float compared to actually all 19 plus million Bitcoin that are kind of in circulation. And so the reason why that becomes important is as price goes up, you will see that number trend down. It actually hit 70%, I think earlier this year, and it's come down a little bit, or maybe in December of 2023. 7 out of every 10 Bitcoin in circulation did not move in the trailing 12 months. That's an insane number. Only 3 out of 10 are available for trading. Now, as price has moved up, we've gone from 70 down to 65%. So it's still pretty healthy, but by the end of the bull market, that number will go from 65 probably down closer to like 55 or 50%. And so what people are doing is as price rises, you can think of it as it's a daily bid for their Bitcoin. So the 1-year number is impressive because during that time period, what we saw is Bitcoin's price has gone up substantially. But over the 2-year time frame, Bitcoin's price has tripled. So we went from, kind of sub 20,000 to over 60,000 in a 2-year time frame, yet 1 out of every 2 Bitcoin has not moved. Now, some portion of those are lost. We don't know how much. I don't think it's as high as the number as some people think it is, but some portion for sure is lost. But 1 out of every 2 Bitcoin has not moved in 2 years, even though the price has tripled. Those are long-term holders. Those are people who are saying it's going higher, right? They're expressing their view in the market because they're not willing to sell at these prices. And so that is a huge reason why I think some of the best investors in the world, like the Paul Tudor Joneses, the Stanley Druckenmillers, etc., are so excited about Bitcoin, is because they realize these people are nuts. They're going to hold the Bitcoin. They're going to make it a much less liquid supply, and therefore increases in demand, like an ETF, are going to skyrocket the price. Now, what's fascinating to me is the ETFs are also a net new buyer of Bitcoin, and they're holding it. Yes, there is a redemption feature, so they can have to sell Bitcoin from time to time, but what we see so far in the data is they are usually a net buyer, not a net seller. And so as Bitcoin goes into those funds, it usually doesn't come back out. And so if that continues to happen as well, they're just pulling supply out of circulation. They're holding it in their funds, and that should continue to lead to higher and higher prices over time and more volatility. Are maniacs. They're like, these guys buy this thing, and it doesn't matter if it goes up hundreds of percent, if it drops 90%, they just hold. And so when you have a massive group of people, and remember, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin not moving regardless of where the price goes. As an investor who wants to seek and capture risk, because the risk you take is the return you earn, then you want to go find places like this where you are alongside, shoulder to shoulder, other maniacs. And so I think that's where people kind of get it confused. They think that Wall Street's going to run away from this asset. Wall Street likes volatility because volatility means there's potential return. Wall Street likes risk because the more risk they take, the more return they can capture. Wall Street likes the maniacs because every person on Wall Street is a closet maniac. They're just trying to do it inside of an institution with risk management, etc. And so Bitcoin was almost purpose built for resonating on Wall Street. It's just that in the early days, a lot of those financial institutions couldn't adopt the asset, but now they look at this data and they say, you're telling me if this asset drops 80 to 90%, these guys don't sell? They just buy more? Sign me up. How do I buy some of that? And I know this because literally Stanley Druckenmiller and Paul Tudor Jones have gone on CNBC and explicitly said that after the 2018 crash, they called each other and they had a conversation. And they said something like, did you know that, 70% of the people who held Bitcoin at 20,000 are still holding it at 3,500? They said, I got to get me some of that. Let me go find the maniacs. Let me invest alongside them. That's how they got into Bitcoin. And obviously that worked out very well for them.
Pompliano lays out a powerful case for why Bitcoin could skyrocket soon. He points out that every previous halving has sparked massive bull runs. But here's the game changer. 65% of Bitcoin is locked up by long-term holders who aren't selling, even as prices rise. This limited supply, combined with growing demand, makes every price swing more dramatic. Although there are 19 million Bitcoin in circulation, only a small portion is actually available for trading. As demand increases, especially with institutional investors getting ready for Bitcoin ETFs, prices are set to climb. Pompliano believes Wall Street is waking up to the reality that these die-hard Bitcoin holders won't sell until we hit $80,000 or even $100,000. When that moment comes, where institutional demand meets the unwavering loyalty of Bitcoin's core investors, the price could explode. Stick around because what happens next could change everything.
And so Bitcoin is the strongest computer network in the world. And so when people say Bitcoin's not backed by anything, it is backed by something. It's backed by the strongest computer network in the world. How valuable do you think that is in today's day and age? It's pretty damn valuable. It's worth more than $1 trillion for sure, right? And so I think that when people start to understand this currency is backed by a commodity, the commodity is the most valuable commodity in the world, they are starting to realize, wait a second, maybe I should get some. And so if you start to look at kind of that argument, you then say to yourself, well, how much bigger and stronger is the Bitcoin network? If you take all of the computing power of Amazon's AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure and combine it, Bitcoin is multiples bigger than those three computing networks combined. And so it's hard to fathom just how big the computer network is, how strong it is, how decentralized it is, how resilient it is. And so not only is it a valuable commodity, it's also the greatest form. Think about if I said to you, a bunch of people around the world came together and they created something that's never been created in human history before. They created the strongest computer network ever invented by humans. And I said to you, what would somebody be willing to pay for that? And you told me $1 trillion, I'd laugh at you. And so I think that's what people are starting to realize is this is going to be worth a lot more. How much, when, it's all up for debate, but $1 trillion for a price tag of the strongest computer network in the world is probably too low. This computational network is doing the single most important computational work in human history. It is protecting economic value. There is nothing else in the world that protects economic value like this. And so in a world that is littered with central banks and governments who have spending problems, who have national debts that are exploding, that are devaluing their currency, who are punishing 50+% of their populations and pushing them into poverty, and they're eating away at your economic value, they are essentially stealing from you. The purchasing power of the US dollar is down more than 25%, depending on which estimate you look at. So that means that for every dollar that you had in 2020, today you can buy 75 cents worth of goods and services. They stole 25% of your purchasing power. How do you protect yourself? Bitcoin is not the only solution. You can buy real estate, you can buy gold, you can buy a lot of different assets, but Bitcoin is the best at doing it over a long period of time so far. Now it's an early experiment, it's only 15 years old, it's still got a lot of time to go. Gold's thousands of years old, real estate obviously very old as well. But Bitcoin is probably one of the most promising ones as well, because if it continues to get repriced by the world as the best asset to protect economic value, one of the things that I think finance people have a harder time kind of wrapping their head around compared to maybe the tech people is what are the implications of this? And so if I said to you, if the root cause of poverty around the world is the fact that there are billions of people who earn economic value every day, they leave it in cash, whatever their local currency is, and their government devalues that currency, and so they fall further and further behind, they can't get ahead, the wealth inequality gap widens, and these people get punished. But there's a solution. They simply can save that economic value in a different currency. That currency can't be devalued, it can't be created out of thin air, it's not controlled by anyone, and it's going to protect their economic value and their purchasing power. All of a sudden, it's not very hard to see a world where maybe this one asset could actually lift people out of poverty, could actually have this global impact that would change the lives of billions of people.
In the end, Pompliano's message is crystal clear. Bitcoin is on the cusp of a massive price breakout, and the opportunity to act is shrinking by the day. This isn't just speculation, it's backed by data, cycles, and a deep understanding of Bitcoin's supply dynamics. If you're sitting on the fence, now might be your last chance to jump in before the next wave takes off. Everything is pointing in the same direction, up. So the question is, will you be part of this ride? Or will you look back and wish you had made your move when the signs were this clear?